In this update, we've got major flooding, big time storms, and a lot of heat as we start the first day of summer. So, if we take a look at the satellite picture, we've got a lot of instability that's draped across the middle of the country, as well as down here in Florida into Georgia. We also have some light to moderate rain back into portions of Virginia and West Virginia. But it's all complements of just very high dew points. These areas are gravitating towards just the higher moisture content. You can see all these areas into purple. That is your well above average into the 70s, oppressive dew points. That makes the humidity levels just sky high. Anybody who lives down there in these regions, I don't need to tell you, you know it's kind of a wet blanket outside, as some of these areas have seen like record heat indexes across parts of Texas yesterday. They even had 3 all-time records broken. That's hard to do, folks. There's been a lot of heat waves over the years in Texas. There were actually 3 cities that broke all-time record highs. Just intense heat, and you can definitely see where the higher dew points are. That's where all the moisture content is. So as the atmosphere starts to bubble up and heat up, it just wrings it out like a sponge. It doesn't take much across the Dakotas, and these areas are diving from north to south. And we also have that area of low pressure down here, portions across the southeast, where they've seen very heavy rain, and it's a compounding effect over many days. And they're definitely expecting a lot of rain down here into this region. But later on tonight, we have yet another mesoscale convective system that's going to be originating up here into portions of Wyoming. And that's really going to get its act together, especially in the evening time frame. You can actually see these ribs start to break out. That's definitely indicative of these bow echoes and very intense winds. These are diving across down to the south. These areas will be packing a punch, 70, 80, maybe even some isolated reports of 90 miles an hour later on tonight. Once it heads into Texas, it's probably going to be an overnight, meaning like an after midnight type of event. Same deal they had in Tulsa the other evening, where they experienced that 100-mile-per-hour wind gust at like 1 o'clock in the morning. Same thing could happen tonight with those very intense winds into the overnight time frame. In fact, the Storm Prediction Center has already upgraded this to an enhanced risk across these regions, originating in portions of Wyoming, and that dives south across portions of eastern portions of Colorado into the Texas Panhandle, western Oklahoma, and back into west Texas with those intense winds. And yes, those are the highlighted threats. The most intense threat are going to be your winds, and where you definitely see those dotted shapes, that is indicative of like 65 plus miles an hour. So yeah, not out of the question across the Texas Panhandle into the Oklahoma City area tonight, draped across the Childers region, maybe Wichita Falls. All those regions could be hit hard, so definitely secure loose objects if you live out there in West Texas, because man, those storms are going to be coming in with a vengeance. And this is an overnight threat, folks. This is in the wee hours of the morning, as these things really kind of get their act together. What happens is we've got this area of kind of low pressure that's been draped across portions of the southeast. That's actually kind of backdoored a little bit, and what that's done is that's actually pushed the ridge that's been dominating over Texas the last couple of days with all those excessive heat warnings. By tonight, that actually shifts back into Mexico. That creates northwest flow, guys, and that creates a funnel effect that's going to be draping those storms down from northwest to east-southeast motion. And so that's exactly how this is going to play out. And it's probably going to be leaving the door open for 2 rounds of severe storms tonight, and really going into tomorrow for a lot of these same areas. So if we take a look at where the rain prospects will be tomorrow, kind of the same area, folks, with that low pressure and pushing that ridge back into Mexico. That opens the door across the middle of the country. So do expect another round of severe storms as we head into going into your Thursday into Friday morning time frame across these regions. And then across portions of the east, we still have that area of low pressure, and it's still sitting and spinning, and it's still going to be wringing out abundance amount of moisture. And some of these are already under flood watches across these regions. So you're going to be adding to these totals And definitely some areas could see some extensive, if not almost major flooding across these regions. So definitely be on high alert because these soils are going to be really saturated and it's going to have no place to go with this rainfall, as it's not going to be letting up anytime soon with this persistent pattern really taking shape. So if we break down the next 3 days, it's really where all the areas that have the higher dew points are. So if you're underneath that ridge of high pressure and kind of that sinking air, lower humidity, lower dew points, it's just going to be very difficult to squeeze out any precipitation. And where you're not, it's just going to be completely the opposite. It's going to be able to easily wring it out like a sponge across portions of Montana through the Dakotas, and that shifts tails down into the middle of the country across the Central Plains. That's where severe storms could be. Its main impact are going to be the winds. So I definitely can't rule out an isolated tornado or two across eastern portions of Colorado tonight and across the western portions of Oklahoma and into the Texas Panhandle. But the main concern are going to be your microburst winds, downburst winds, straight line winds, squall line moving across from northwest to east southeast into the overnight time frame. And then there's the heavier rains really highlighted across southeastern portions of Georgia, back into the Carolinas, really inundated North Carolina and Virginia with the more copious amounts of rain. Going to be, like I said, wringing it out like a sponge back into portions of Delaware and into New Jersey areas. So definitely be on high alert, as there's just a lot of rainfall in these areas. But what happens by the weekend? The ridge comes back. It doesn't hang out in Mexico very long, but what happens when it comes back? It comes back mean, folks, and this thing is ready for business going into next week. So eventually this ridge is just really going to expand across the deep south, and we've got some intense heat setting up shop for next week. So that puts the storm threat over the top. So that's going to shut the taps off Oklahoma and Texas as far as on the precipitation front. So with the ring, with the setup, lifting up and over the ridge, that's going to put the storm placement across the higher plains by now. Now we're talking portions of South Dakota, getting into the Nebraska region and northern portions of Kansas, but it's not going to continue further south because once it's going to hit that ridge of high pressure, it's going to put on the brakes and it's not going any further south. It's all going to be elongated further north, as it's going to be gravitating towards those higher dew points and the most higher unstable air mass. And that's exactly what's going to happen on going Friday and into the Saturday time frame, as this eventually will shift a little bit further off into the east. So now we're talking areas into portions of southern portions of Minnesota, back into Iowa, getting into northern portions of Missouri. And then I think eventually by Sunday, this will just shift off further to the east and put more Illinois into play, and eventually head into portions of Wisconsin with likely some severe storms by then. So the overall precipitation front, where that sets up shop for your Saturday timeframe, like I mentioned, once that ridge gets locked and loaded across the south, it's going to be very difficult to squeeze out any precipitation across those regions, across the desert Southwest and much of the West. But up and over the ridge we go, and that's where the storm placement and that's where the heavier rains are going to be, really elongating around Montana through the Dakotas and portions of, getting into Minnesota and going into Wisconsin. And then you have just kind of light to moderate rain across a good part of the mid-Atlantic and as well as into the Northeast. That's on your Saturday time frame. But once we shift and go into Sunday and then heading into Monday time frame, the ridge really starts to intensify and build and expand by then. And once it expands, then it really shifts the precipitation mainly just off to the east, folks. So any other unsettled weather by the time we get into early part of next week will be really draped across a good part of the East Coast. So highlighted over the Southeast again. So you can see it's a compounding effects, folks. It's just going to be a soggy mess. Eventually, you're going to be like, when's this stuff going to stop? Because you got a lot of rain coming, and then heading up into the Ohio Valley where they desperately need some rain, and then that will fishtail into the portions of the Northeast. But what's going to happen is really actually kind of cool next week. we've got a first little, tropical system down there in the Pacific. And so what that's going to do is once this kind of generates and gets stronger, the outflow from this Pacific storm, it's not heading north, it's heading off to a good part of the west, right? But what that does is that spreads its upper level outflow north back into Texas where the ridge is. And boom, that just explodes the ridge across Texas. Then that's when you're looking at some serious heat really unfolding by then. By the time we head into, say, the 28th, 29th of the month, as this ridge will just dominate and expand. And it's not just Texas anymore. It'll be Oklahoma, it'll be Kansas, it'll be Missouri, it'll be Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Western Tennessee. It'll be a multi-state event. So this is a compounding effect, folks. Once that ridge comes back on the weekend, and then really elevates based upon the strength of that intensity of that Pacific storm, if not a hurricane, then the outflow of that system just blows up the ridge to the north as it shifts off to the west. And that's when really intense heat really starts to unfold across multiple states across the southern plains. And that intense heat is highlighted from the Climate Prediction Center. It's been a long time, folks. I know Texas gets hot, but excessive heat and a high risk of excessive heat is definitely kind of rare, even down here for this region. So you're talking dangerous stuff on top of those higher dew points that you've already seen. And they've already seen some record high temperatures across these regions. And the ground's going to be drying out by then. And the heat is going to soar. And then on top of the heat index, multiple records are easily going to unfold by then, as this is just going to expand and intensify, shift off to the west, taking effect over the desert Southwest, expanding further north, even getting into portions of Iowa by the time we head in towards the first couple of days of July. But what that looks like going forward as we end June, again, across the South, it's just going to be the heat is going to be the dominating headlines across a good part of the South. Is just some records will daily, monthly, if not all-time records get crushed and down here in this region. But where we see the weakness is the cold air aloft is up here across the Dakotas into Minnesota and back into Wisconsin. By the time we head into Friday, say of next week, around the 30th time frame, and that would likely be where the storms would be. Again, up and over the ridge, and all the intensity of the very high moisture content by then will be well north, away from that ridge, and really highlighted over Montana, back in through North Dakota, and then signifying over into Minnesota and back into Wisconsin by then. But further south, again, like I mentioned, as we end June and the first couple of days of July, the excessive heat just compounds, and it doesn't go anywhere anytime soon, folks. That heat is for real this year. Further south, it's going to be, you're going to be tired. You're going to be tired of the heat. So definitely stay hydrated, stay inside as much as you can, because it gets to you after a while. I mean, I live down here, and it's oppressive to go outside sometimes, especially 4 or 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. You just start sweating in like 30 seconds. It doesn't take much. And so where the rain's going to be is away from that ridge, right? So here's the overall precipitation anomalies for the next 5 days. So you mainly get these ridge riders over the top. So we're seeing a lot of heavier rains are really going to be setting up shop across portions of Montana, through the Dakotas, into Minnesota, and portions of Wisconsin. Well, at the same time, heavier rains, if not flooding rains, are going to ensue across a good part of the East Coast, but especially into the Carolinas, getting into Virginia. Those areas could get hard with heavy training, convective thunderstorms. Would be a compounding event. They've already got flood watches across these regions. So definitely a huge concern, with a lot of rain going to be on the table for the next week across these regions. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch me in the next update, where I protect you before and after the storm.